Good afternoon, everyone. I am Afsin Islam. Today in this presentation, I'm going to discuss what damage a disaster can do to the physical and social infrastructure of a society. Above all, what havoc a disaster can wreak on a community. It's true that nothing can be worse than losing one's life. But sometimes calamities bring such misery in people's lives that people think it would be better if they died rather than experiencing or leading such a sorrowful life. The potential loss of life, injury, or destroyed or damaged assets which could occur to a system, society, or a community in a specific period of time, determined probabilistically as a function of hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity. Apart from deaths, natural disasters cause direct damage that includes destruction of physical and social infrastructure, assets, and ecosystem production. Such damage also creates indirect interruption in economic activities of a community. Here are the objectives. I was born and grew up in a country which is cited among one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. Various natural and man-made hazards hit this country almost every year, most of which end up forming into disasters. As this country is a developing country and a large part of the population is weak in terms of infrastructure, economy, and education system, disaster is a serious threat to this nation. Having had the opportunity to closely experiencing various calamities and their devastation in this country, I can clearly remember the immense suffering of the people during Cyclone Sidor, which I have seen with my own eyes. As cyclones are high-speedy spinning wind that originate in the sea, the coastal regions are mostly prone to this hazard. Every year, around 80 cyclones occur in the world in an average, but most of them end up in the sea. Those that hit the coast or land cause massive damage. Being a low-lying alluvial delta by the Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh has been hit by different super cyclones at different times. It was 15th of November 2007, the day Cyclone Sidor hit Bangladesh. 2 days prior to the Sidor strike, the people heard on the weather forecast that a sea storm was coming to hit Bangladesh. During that time, those who were aware were preparing accordingly by organizing their assets, storing food items, or saving drinking water, etc. But a large part of the people from the coastal area, most of whom were illiterate fishermen families and agricultural farmers, did not heed this warning much. Many fishermen families were even hiding while the government was conducting emergency evacuations, moving people to shelters. Later, when they were asked about this, they said that the government had already issued such warnings before, but most of the time nothing happened, so they thought it was one of such false alarms. But they were proven wrong. Sidor struck and took nearly 10,000 lives, although the official death toll was much lower. 32 districts were severely damaged in the Sidor. About 600,000 tons of grain was destroyed in the coastal region. Numerous wild animals of Sundarbans, including innumerable cattle of the farmer communities, were killed. In the coastal area, low-income families suffered the most during cyclones. The reason behind their facing so much loss is their vulnerable condition and less capacity to deal with disasters. Their unawareness, weak structure of houses, low economic status increases and diversifies their losses. Many fishermen go out to the sea with their not very strong trawlers despite of getting the warning of disasters to continue their livelihood actions. Again, many fishermen tend to stay in the middle of the sea for weeks to catch fish. Advance warning of calamity does not reach them. Because of this, they do not even be able to return to their locality and lose their lives in the hazards in the middle of the sea. Impacts of Cedar on physical infrastructure. The Cedar was a Category 4 cyclone and was accompanied by tidal waves up to 5 meters high and surges up to 6 meters in some areas, breaching coastal and river embankment, flooding low-lying areas, and causing extensive physical destruction. High winds and floods also caused damage to the housing, roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. Electricity and communication were knocked out, and roads and waterways became impassable. Drinking water was contaminated by debris, and many sources were inundated with the intrusion of saline water from tidal surges. The sanitation infrastructure was completely destroyed in the coastal areas. Tropical cyclones often knock out power to hundreds of thousands of people, preventing vital communication and hampering rescue efforts. Tropical cyclones often destroy key bridges, overpasses, and roads, complicates the efforts to transport food, clean water, and medicine to the areas that are in need. According to agricultural official estimation, Cyclone Cedar fully damaged 1.12 million hectares of croplands, and nearly 1.39 million hectares was partially damaged. Almost 1.87 million livestock and poultry were killed. This represents significant hardship and loss of livelihood to those almost 7 million cedar-affected people. Impacts of the infrastructural degradation on community. I believe physical and social infrastructures are highly interdependent. Disruption of physical infrastructure leads to social infrastructural damage. A disaster-affected community has to go through radical changes inside and out, which affects almost every level and section of its service distribution states. Distortion of the social and physical infrastructure due to disasters slows down the progress of a community. The onset of a disaster or conflict in a community often physically destroys important social institutions. It disrupts access of people to the basic services in the community. Besides, disaster also pose a threat and create new pressure on those individuals who are directly or indirectly involved in managing and maintaining the social institutions, services, and works, such as teachers, doctors, nurses, or other social service workers. It ends up disrupting the community's ability to provide its basic services to its people. Disaster also negatively alter the usual state of our environment by damaging its components, which cause damage to the biodiversity. Even though 14 years have passed since Cedar's rampage, the wounds of the bereaved people of the coastal areas have not yet dried up. After Cyclone Cedar hit the coast, 3,200 fishermen families were affected reportedly. Already hunger, poverty, and residential shortage have been rising in the families of the coastal fishermen all year round, and the natural calamities are strike like a bitter blow to the dead. Cyclones destroy the flimsy houses of the fishermen, their last belongings swept away by tidal floods, and they are subjected to discrimination in accessing various social services as they were already below the poverty line. Disasters on top of that make them more vulnerable, damaging their livelihood, nets, trawlers, and other belongings. Also, in the immediate post-disaster phase, the fishing communities get involved in various problems within themselves to ensuring their basic demands for living. Because the relief material is always insufficient compared to the number of the affected people, they get themselves into conflicts for getting relief or medical aid. Social groupings and discrimination happens while distributing the food, drinking water, or clothing. This can lead to disruption in accessing essential services such as healthcare, power, and water supply, and later disruption in their already poor economic and communal status. Social infrastructural impact of cyclones in the coastal area. Beyond causing damages to a particular community, a disaster left its mark on the entire coastal region due to broken roads, inundation caused by high tide. The process of sending aids to the affected areas from other regions get disrupted. Internal communication system collapses due to breakdown of electric grid, network grid. In emergencies, people cannot move to safe places due to obstruction of traffic. The rate of accident increases. Cyclones impact on the economy of a community. Cyclones can disrupt transportation system and damage crops, leading to shortage in food supply and increased price. All of this impact can lead to a decrease in consumer spending and business activity, which can impact the GDP growth of a country. Besides, capital assets and infrastructure such as housing, schools, factories, and equipment, roads, dams, and bridges get damaged. Human capital is depleted due to the loss of life, the loss of skilled workers, and the destruction of education infrastructure that disrupt education system. People interact with their physical environment through the air they breathe, water they drink, houses they live in, and the transportation they access to travel to works or going to school. Poor physical environment can affect our ability and that of our families and neighbors to live long and healthy lives. Strong infrastructure of houses and shelters enhance people's resilience capacity. Poor physical environment interrupt people's ability to live long and healthy life. Trees prevent high wind, holds soil from being washed away during floods or high tide. High land prevent houses from being inundated. Again, social infrastructures providing basic services including health, education, emergency aids, relief in time that enhance people's capacity to deal with the adverse situation. Things that community people can do to reduce their chances of being harmed by a disaster. Natural hazards or calamities cannot be prevented, but disaster can be managed by improved forecasting and warning system, taking coastal afforestation projects and implementing them, establishing enough number of resilient cyclone shelters in the coastal areas, and implementing embankment can lower the causality rate as well. Most of the destruction and related social and economic losses resulted from the harsh storm conditions and the subsequent failure of an extensive embankment system. The current warning signals alerting system should be reviewed to ensure that communities can better understand the level of actual risk they face and the actions they must take to protect themselves and their livelihoods. A new national cyclone shelter strategy should be established with designs based on all hazard risk assessment with specific emphasis on gender needs and safety livestock factored in. Reconstruction of damaged infrastructure, including embankment, should be undertaken following the full risk assessment to establish very clearly why damage occurred and more specifically how it could have been avoided. When the social and physical infrastructure of a community get disrupted as a result of a disaster, It slows down the progress of that community. Disasters are responsible for the alteration of a community's production pattern, disrupting the community's ability to provide its basic services, disrupting all the normal activities of the people. This makes the people of the community highly dependent on external aid so that they can continue the basic course of life. To prevent all this, a national contingency plan for major crisis events should be developed. This plan should detail policy and arrangements for such matter as overall coordination, dissemination of warnings, evacuation management, search and rescue, relief management including damage assessment information management, government, donor and NGOs coordination and recovery planning. As disasters physically destroy important social institutions, they disrupt access to basic services for people in the community. Natural hazards will continue to strike. The world must learn to cope with them by increasing resiliency, enhancing capacity, and reducing vulnerability.